Hey, how are you? Hope you're having a good afternoon, a guten and freilichen Erev Purim. Tonight is Purim and everyone's in the mode of festivities, of joy, of parties. We have Megillah reading tonight with some light festivities at the shul at 6 p.m. And then we have a second reading, and tomorrow we have our Purim bash, Purim around the world, the Emeth Social Hall, so many celebrations. But before we get to Purim, we have the Fast of Esther, which takes place today. We all know that Esther, before she went to the king, before she went to see Achashverosh, although she knew she had to look as beautiful as she could, so Achashverosh should accept her plea and should allow her in, she fasted because she recognized that as much as she could do physically to appeal to Achashverosh, she had to appeal to the King of Kings, to the Almighty, and therefore we fast today. But there's something very interesting in the story of Esther. Don't forget, the Megillah is called Megillat Esther, not Megillat Mordechai. And in the story of the Megillah, we read the remarkable events that happen. But there's one verse that stands out to us. It says that every single day, the Megillah reader will chant, B'chol yom v'yom Mordechai misalech. Mordechai would go to the courtyard of the king, Ladas Shloim Esther, to know the well-being of Esther, and what he could do for her. And the question the rabbis asks, Esther became queen in the 7th year of Achashverosh's reign. The story of Purim didn't begin till the 12th year. And yet the rabbis tell us that every single day, without fail, Mordechai went to the palace. He couldn't get into the palace. He went to the courtyard to look after Esther. Who was Esther? Esther was his niece who was orphaned. Her father died when her mother was pregnant, and after she was born, her mother died. And Mordechai took her in. And yet, every single day, without fail, for 5 years, Mordechai went where? He went to the courtyard. Just maybe he would see Esther through the window and wink to her. Or maybe he would send a message that she should know that he is thinking about her, that he cares about her. The remarkable story of Mordechai. And that's why later on, 5 years later, when Mordechai turns to Esther and says, Umi Yodeya, he says, if you will be quiet today, God will find the salvation. But who knows if for this moment, God made you queen, and Esther rises to the occasion. What made her rise to the occasion? Tell us the rabbis. It was Mordechai's remarkable commitment over so many years, where Mordechai went every day without fail, although there was nothing he could do, that Esther should know she was not forgotten, that Esther would know that she was being thought about and cared about and loved about. And then we see the remarkable ending that happens with the salvation and the victory that comes through Esther and through Mordechai's insistence and persistence to show her love. Think about us today and the world we live in, and think about how much effort and kindness and love we need to show to others. We need to learn from Esther about what it means, the way from Mordechai, of the way he looked after Esther, no matter what. Because ultimately, as we say in English, what goes around comes around. Ultimately, that persistence, that commitment, that love, that dedication ended up saving the Jewish people when Esther rose to the occasion to come to Achashverosh. I heard this remarkable story that happened 30 years ago, at least it began, when a Dr. Michael Shannon, he was a preemies doctor, a newbie preemies in the hospital, and he was trying to save this little boy who was born 3.2 ounces, who had a 50% chance for survival. His name was Chris Torkey, and miraculously, he saved him and he nurtured him and he took care of him till he was able to be on his own and left the hospital healthy. 30 years later, Chris Torkey, now a fire paramedic, gets a call that an SUV was slammed into by an 18-wheeler and the car's on fire and someone is stuck in it. And he runs to the scene, not knowing that the person in the car is Dr. Michael Shannon, who saved his life. And he gets him out of the car and rushes him to the hospital, where he spends weeks in the hospital. They had to amputate 2 of his toes, and he had broken bones and legs and a head injury. And as they were nurturing him back to health, they bonded over those 3 weeks. The doctor, Michael Shannon, who saved Chris Torkey 30 years ago, and Chris Torkey, who saved Dr. Shannon 30 years later. And a year later, when Chris Torkey had a son, a baby, who was born again a preemie, the doctor took him under his wings. The message, before we get to Purim, before we celebrate, before we party, is to learn from Mordechai. B'chol yoyim v'yoyim, Mordechai misalech b'chazar beis hamelech. Look after those who need it. Even if you think you can't do anything about it, them knowing that you love and you care and you're committed will send the right signals and messages that hopefully will allow this person to be the strong person they need and bring salvation back to you and back to many others. Chag Sameach, please join us over Purim to celebrate the remarkable holiday.